Hey everybody, it is the RUFF'N IT hour and power for your relationships. That's right, listen, we are here to maximize you. And because we're here to maximize you, listen, we know that you have come. And that because you have come, listen, we know that you don't want to come alone. Why? Because we don't do relationships alone. And because we don't do relationships alone, listen, we've got to come with the people that we do relationships with. And so therefore, listen, I want to make sure that not only are we acknowledging those that we are in relationship with, but listen, we're acknowledging those, listen, that we represent. And so we know that not only do we benefit from a time like this, but we understand that others benefit from a time like this. And so we always want to make sure that, listen, we are sharing. If you're on YouTube, listen, I want to make sure that you are subscribing to our YouTube channel. Listen, I want to make sure that, listen, you hit that subscribe button. I want to make sure that you hit that bell icon so that you can get the notifications when we go live. Listen, if you are here with us on Facebook, I want to make sure that you are not only following us or not only here today, but listen, that you are liking our page. Listen, that you are also following us on Facebook. And listen, you know what we always say, let's like, let's share, let's follow. And so listen, I thank you for being here today. I thank you for joining us for such a time as this. And because you know that here we talk about the real nitty and gritty. Listen, we get into the things that matter most when it comes to you and I having a relationship with others, a relationship that we enjoy, a relationship that we want to be a part of, a relationship that makes a difference for our lives. And so therefore, we want to make sure that we're here in this space and place because we're going to dive right into these issues that begin to make a difference in our relationship. And so listen, I want you to know that, listen, I'm pastor and therapist Marcus Ruffin, and I am here. Listen, that's right. I am here to give you spiritual, practical, and listen, mental principles that begin to shape and form and fashion our relationships. That's right. Listen, we're on part 8 today. And so listen, I want you to go ahead and get yourself ready to join me as we get ready to dive into, listen, as we get ready to dive into our topic for today, resolving conflict in relationships. That's right, listen, we're talking about how do we resolve conflict in relationships. And because this is what we're doing today, listen, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for being here with us. And I know that, listen, we are here to be maximized for life and eternity. That's right. Listen, we are here to be maximized for life and eternity. And so listen, as you see here, I'm going to be bringing up some things on the screen. If you're joining us here for the very first time, I want to thank you for being here with us. And listen, if you're watching this live, you can go to our YouTube channel and you can put comments, you can put questions pertaining to the topic at hand. And listen, we answer those in real time. If you're watching this on the rebroadcast, then I thank you for tuning in. But I cannot promise you that the questions that you have will be the questions that we would be able to answer. And so listen, we want to just go ahead and dive into what it is that we are getting into today. And I always like to start off with a quote because I think that sometimes when we're looking at our relationships and we're looking at these things that impact us the most, the good, the bad, the ugly, I think that sometimes when we not only look at the spiritual and the mental and the practical side of this, but sometimes just a quote from someone else will just shed a little more light. And so here, when you look at this particular quote by Shannon Adler, it says that sometimes, notice now, sometimes God doesn't send you into a battle, listen, to win it. He sends you to end it. Now, I want you to notice that, listen, he doesn't send you always into a battle to win it, but he sends you into a battle, listen, to end it. And sometimes, listen, when we're talking about conflict, when we're talking about resolving conflict, how many times is it that, listen, you and I have found ourselves in some sort of situation, some kind of scenario. Listen, we're not even sure maybe how it got started. We're not even sure where this began. We just know that right now we're in the midst of a situation. And listen, we may not know who's the culprit. We might not know, who is the instigator, but we just know that there's a problem right now. And sometimes, listen, as much as we are trying to figure out how to solve the issue, sometimes the issue is really trying to figure out how can we resolve the issue. Listen, how can we put an end to this whole matter? And listen, putting an end to it usually means that we're going to have a resolution of some sort. That's what it means. It means that we're going to have a resolution of some sort. And so, listen, I want you to know that not only do we sometimes give a quote, but listen, we always like to also give a spiritual passage that really speaks to the spiritual side of things. And so here, as you see, as I pull up on the screen, notice now here in Matthew chapter 18, verse 15, and it reads this way, verse 15, it says, if a fellow believer hurts you, go and tell him, work it out. Notice now, work it out between the two of you. If he listens, you've made a friend. Notice it goes on to say, if he won't listen, or it could be if she won't listen. Notice now, it says, take one of two others alone, so that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest, and try again. And as much as, listen, we have been here in this series and we've been talking about, resolving conflict. We're on part 8 today, and we've looked at this passage in a variety of ways. One of the things that we have to highlight here that this second portion points out is that sometimes you and I are called into a conflict not because we are a part of it, but we are called to help bring resolution. We're help bring an end to the matter. And when you recognize that, listen, there are times in which we have to be able to know how to go in and to mediate the issue. Sometimes as the third party, we have to be able to know how to separate our emotions from the matter, even to separate our emotions from the persons that are involved in order to resolve the dispute. My question to you is, if we're not able to do that in our own conflicts and our own scenarios, how much more are we not able to do that in somebody else's issue? Now, granted, there are times in which, because we're not as intricately involved, we can be a little more objective. We can kind of step aside and see a little more clearly. But I would tell you that often the same steps and the same principles that require you and I to be able to resolve conflicts within our own dynamics, within our own relationships, within the people in which we're having to work things out. When we're able to do that in our own, 9 times out of 10, we are much more capable and able to do that in somebody else's. And I'm telling you that, listen, you and I have the ability to be able to make that happen, because we're going to talk about some final principles today. Listen, we're going to talk about some final principles today to be able to help you and I to resolve conflict. Now, if you've missed any of these before now, Listen, all of these are on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page. And therefore, you can go back and watch you can watch parts 1 through 7. But today we're going to be talking about part 8 as it relates to you and I being able to resolve conflict in relationships. And so here, I've talked about this one piece about conflict resolution versus conflict management. And the reason why I highlight that is because when you and I talk about conflict management, that is the navigation through the conflict process itself. How well do you and I know how to be able to, listen, how well do you and I know how to be able to bring the kind of skill sets that are necessary for you and I to be able to navigate through the process, to navigate through it. So once you and I, and we've talked about those skill sets, and we've talked about the pieces to the puzzle in earlier segments in this particular resolving conflict teaching that we've been doing. And so here we're really talking about conflict resolution, which is how do we once we've navigated through the process, how do we then work out a place and space to get to a resolution? And I think oftentimes what happens is that we're not really navigating through the process as efficiently and as skillfully. And so therefore we're really wigged out, burnt out. Sometimes we have totally given up before we even get to a place of resolution. And so therefore, a lot of the times we don't really make it to resolution. We're just tired and we're exhausted. And I'm telling you, that is not the most effective way for resolving conflict in any kind of relationship. And so here, I want you to also understand that we're talking solely about conflict resolution today. That is only thing that we're talking about. And so we've looked at here last week a model for discussion. And because we looked at this model for discussion, we kind of laid it out about what that looked like in terms of being able to go from a problem to a place of solution. And because we were looking at that, notice now, I want you to see that here were some of the things that we highlighted. Now, I'm not going to go over these things in detail. I'm just highlighting these things that we talked about this. If you want the details, you have to go back and look at what we, part 7 of last week. But notice it says, ask for a discussion time. Very key. If we're having a model for being able to move from a problem to a resolution. Then we said that the person with the gripe must share their thoughts and feelings without interruption. Then we said that the listener, the person who was at first listening to the person that had the gripe, then the listener now has the opportunity to share his or her thoughts and feelings without interruption. And then we said, number 4, it is moving from sharing the problem to the solution. We said it's moving from sharing the problem to the solution. And because we had ended on that note last week, this is where we are really picking up today to be able to talk about what does the resolution phase of resolving a conflict look like? What does that really look like? Because without you and I understanding what that looks like, I cannot say that you and I have been equipped. I don't believe that this is innate. I don't think that this is something that you and I are naturally exposed to. And so therefore, this is why it is a skill. It is not just an ability. All of us have the ability to resolve a conflict, but do you and I have the skill to resolve the conflict? And without the skill to resolve the conflict, you and I are not equipped to be able to really move through the process from finding out what's the problem to the place where we have annihilated the problem. That's what conflict resolution is all about. Now, remember, if you have any questions, you can post those questions right here on the YouTube or on our Facebook page. And listen, we like to answer those in real time. And so here is the ultimate goal. Remember now, I want you to see this. This is the ultimate goal when we talk about conflict resolution. The ultimate goal is to understand the problem in order to move to the solution. Now, I know that may be simple, that may be basic, but it trips up a lot of people. The simple goal is to understand the problem in order to move to the solution. A problem that is well defined is a problem that's half solved. A problem that is well defined is a problem that's half solved. And I would tell you that when you and I are talking about moving from the problem to the solution, that oftentimes we have spent a lot of time, listen, we have spent a lot of time talking about the problem. We've gotten so convoluted in the problem that often we have no energy, we have no desire, we're just wanting this to be done and over. And so therefore, we don't really move into a resolution that really attacks the problem the way that we've given the energy to attack the problem. I'm sorry, we don't really move into resolution to really attack the solution the way that we have moved into the problem and we have attacked it, or often we've attacked one another. And so here, I want you to see that I have laid out some things that I believe that are essential for you and I to understand how we move from talking about the problem to how we move in discussing the resolution. And so here, when you begin to look here at the screen, and some of you may be doing something else, you may be driving while you're listening, and so you may not be able to look at the screen, but this will be there for the replay if you would like to go back to it. And so here, listen, to understand the problem in order to move to the solution. Notice now, this is where you and I want to put most of our energy. You and I have to understand that, listen, you want to know how you want the situation to be different in the future. Sometimes we often just want to feel better. We often just want things to be better, but we really haven't thought about how will that be measured? How or what would that actually look like when we say that we have a solution that is working, not just for you, but for all parties involved? Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's 100% satisfied, but it means it is a solution that is working for us. And here is the thing. You've got to put the energy here. Now, this may not be a process, listen, that we lay out. Listen, this may not be a process that is done in one instance. This may be something that happens over a few days. All depends on how intense, all depends on how much details, how much this is intricately involved. But I'm just telling you that this usually does not come with something that you and I, when you talk about something significant, that is just solved just like that. And so therefore, we've got to recognize what all is involved. Notice now, resolving conflict, I want you to see this. Resolving conflict is not about changing the other person. Man, that is so key. Resolving conflict is not about changing the other person. Listen, change is up to the individual. When you and I are talking about changing, notice, when you and I are talking about resolution, it is not your responsibility, it's not my responsibility to be able to change the person. The only person who can make that decision is the person. We're here to talk about what is the resolution. What is the solution that is needed to be able to get us through this problem? Now, obviously, if we're talking about a resolution, yes, there are going to be some things that require on everybody's end in order for this to work. But the reality is that I'm not responsible for changing you. And sometimes when we come to this place of the resolution, we think, well, I have to be responsible for such and such. No, 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 no. We're not talking about you being responsible for such and such. We're talking about you being responsible for you. Now, notice what it also goes on to say, because I wrote these things out because I believe that these were important. Notice, the person is responsible for his or own behavior, and he or she has the ability to change it. The person is responsible. And so as much as we talk about the solution, as much as we agree upon the resolution, the reality is that the other person has to do their part. And I'm going to talk about what happens if we don't get to that place and space with everybody following through. But the reality is that we've got to go into resolution understanding that. See, I think if we get some things mixed up about what the resolution phase look like, then we will be less apprehensive. We may not even be willing to participate. We may not even feel like this is resolvable because we don't have a good working understanding of what resolution entails and what it means and what it doesn't mean. And so therefore, this is why when we're looking here at just the goal, we're just talking about the goal at this point. Notice now, this works best when there is interest or investment in maintaining the relationship. Now, I think that is so key. Listen, there are many times in which people will talk about how much a problem is a problem and how much they don't like this and they don't like that. But in all honesty, they have no real investment in you. They have no real investment in the other person. They have no real investment in the relationship. And so if this is the case and we understand this from the get-go, we really are clear about the fact that this really isn't about work and resolution. This really isn't about trying to solve this at the root level or having a solution that is going to work for all of us. This is nothing more than you just wanting to sometimes unload. This is nothing more than sometimes you just wanting to get some things off your chest. Sometimes it's nothing more than you just wanting to tell the person off and give them a piece of your mind. And when we have ill-informed ideas or concepts about resolution, then I'm promising you that it's not that resolution doesn't work, it's I am not willing to work what needs to be worked in order for resolution to really matter. And so therefore, listen, this goes back to one of the guidelines that we talked about when we were discussing about what are some guidelines when it comes to resolution. And one of the guidelines that we highlighted, we said that, listen, a discussion is held to reach a solution, not gain a victory. See, if we violate that guideline, and I'm coming into discussing this conflict, I'm coming into just harping on you. I just want to, just berate you. I just want to somehow, feel better because I have demised you or whatever that may be. When that is the case, I really didn't come for resolution. I really didn't come to a place to where we would be able to work better and to live better and to have a more to have a better working relationship. I was simply here to only have this agenda or to have that as my point. And so therefore, I'm really not dedicated to resolution. I'm really not dedicated to a solution. And when that is the case, you and I can understand why not this doesn't work, but why this person doesn't want to work it. And I think that has to be really pretty clear by the time we get to this phase. Notice now, Notice what it goes on to say. I want you to see this other part. Notice it says there has to be an acknowledgement / discussion of their important needs. There has to be an acknowledgement. There has to be a discussion. See, here when we're talking about resolution, we're not trying to put a Band-Aid on it. We're really trying to not only give treatment, right? But we're trying to really resuscitate this relationship. If we feel like it's on the brim of death, we're really trying to put life back into this relationship. Because there are some conflicts that, listen, literally will feel like they've sucked the life out of the relationship. And so not all conflict, actually reaches that depth, but there are those that do. And so therefore, even if it doesn't reach that depth, even if it is a little more surfacey in terms of it's just some mechanical things that we need to work out, the reality is this, that you have some needs. The reality is this, I have some needs. And because you have some needs and I have some needs, those things need to be acknowledged. Those things need to be recognized. Those things have to be embraced, because I cannot, listen, be in this relationship and to think that something, not a preference, not just a comfort. I'm talking about a need. A need are the things that are the non-negotiables. Like I may have a need such as, listen, I cannot be in a relationship where you're going to be hollering at me. Listen, that's a non-negotiable. I cannot be in a relationship in which, listen, you're going to be volatile towards me. Listen, that will not be accepted. I cannot be in a relationship in which I'm feeling like you are a person in which I can't trust. It's a non-negotiable. And so we've got to be able to talk about these needs. And sometimes, as we've discussed in previous segments, that sometimes the rules that I have are not the rules that you have. And so we may need to have some kind of acknowledgement of, hey, here's a rule, here's a violation. You can't cross this line. This is not going to work for me. So being able to acknowledge and highlight those things are important if we're going to have a mutually satisfying relationship. If you think that somehow that you're going to be able to sacrifice needs, now I'm not talking about wants, I'm not talking about preferences, but I'm talking about needs. In order to stay in this relationship, at some point, you're going to say, this is not working for me. And I'm saying, if you know that up front, go ahead and let's make it known. Let's go ahead and put that out on the table, because it's important. If we're going to have resolution, it's resolution that works for all of us, not just some of us. Notice as I bring this back up to the screen, it says here, those involved focus on the problem instead of each other. Listen, as we have talked about in the previous segment, when you are in conflict with someone else, it is easy to get into this pointing of the finger. You're the blame. She's the blame. And the reality is that we may have some contributing factors, but we've got to keep the focus on the problem. Because if we keep the focus on the problem, then we can come together and deal with the problem. But when I keep seeing that you're the problem, and I keep seeing that therefore I'm saying that there's nothing that you can do, or there's very little that you can do because you're the problem, versus the problem is the problem. And there are some things that you have, there's some strength, there's some wisdom, there's some capabilities that you can bring to the table. There's an ability for you to rectify, there's ability for you to change. All of those are important things that you and I will see within the person, because if you don't believe, remember, it's not about you changing the person, but if you don't believe the person is committed, you don't believe the person is willing, you don't believe the person is going to do the work that it takes to really resolve this issue so that this is not going to be something that is ongoing, then I promise you, you're going to be half-hearted. You're going to be less likely to be committed to the process and to do the work because you don't believe that it's worth it because the other person doesn't appear to be as invested. And that may be something that we've got to put out on the table. This is all a part of being able to talk about the resolution. This is why I say you got to put your best energy into this phase if you want to eliminate the problem or at least get the problem to a different level so that it becomes something that you all can continue to work on because you see that there's progress moving forward. But if you don't see that there's progress and you don't believe that there's progress, I promise you're not going to finish out the resolution phase because you'll quit too soon. And so listen, so here I want you to see that not only do we understand this going into the resolution phase, but we understand this throughout the resolution phase. And so here, when we look at this next one, notice this next one says that once we have now committed to the resolution phase, and we are saying, hey, let's really commit to this. Notice it says you got to brainstorm all possible resolutions. Now, here's where, listen, you're putting your best energy forward. Listen, you're working on coming up with ideas and solutions. And listen, and you don't say something doesn't work simply because you don't feel like it or believe it at that moment. You want to really throw everything out there on the table. You want to throw everything out on the table. You want to make sure the other person is throwing everything out there on the table. You want to make sure that you all are not criticizing any ideas at this point. You want you all to be thinking creatively. Listen, there are some times in which this may become such a task that you may have to write some things down. You may have to, listen, get a legal pad. You may have to get a board. Whatever, listen, this is your relationship. This is the relationship you said that mattered. Whether it's a professional relationship, it's a family relationship, it's a marriage, it's a parent-child. If you're saying this relationship has that kind of value, then we want to put everything we can in it because we believe that it's worth every effort. This is why I said, this is why I just said, according to the last slide, you got to be committed and invested in the relationship and in this resolution phase, because if not, here's what I'm telling you will happen. You will quit early. The problem will resurface, and now it compounds, and now you're like, oh, man, and you start feeling like this relationship can't work. And that's because we sometimes put so much energy into the complaining. We put so much energy into the negativity of the problem, and we sometimes are so used to spending so much time and energy there that we're unfamiliar with this side. We're not as knowledgeable about this side. We're not as patient on this side. And this is why I'm trying to show you that when we have relationships that matter, this is the work that is necessary to be able to get to a place that where we eliminate problems because we have working solutions. And we begin to have more things that are working for us in this relationship than the things that are working against us. And somebody may be saying, man, this seems like a lot of work. You're right. But it's work on the right side. The reality is that you're going to work on either side. Listen, you're going to work on the problem side or you're going to work on the resolution side. Because listen, you can complain, you can grumble, you can have a bad attitude. All of that is work. You're just more familiar with it. The work to get to a place where this is going to make life better your relationships more enjoyable is putting the work on the right side. And so here's where, listen, you want to brainstorm. You want to look at all the possibilities. Listen, you want to discuss them. You want to see, okay, let's try this, let's try that. You want to put in the work on this side. So notice now, after we have, looked at these different ideas, we brainstorm on some different things that can happen. Listen, here's where we now have to agree to a plan. Listen, I want you to see this. We have to agree to a plan of action. It's good that we've talked. Listen, it's good that we have looked at all kinds of ideas, but at some point we've got to make a commitment. At some point, we've got to be able to say, here's what I'm going to do differently. Here's what you're going to do differently. This is when, listen, we're verbalizing our commitment. I've seen it to where at times, listen, we've even had to write something, put something in writing, right, to be able to remind ourselves this is what we committed to. Because, listen, paper never forgets. Sometimes the mind loses memory, but the paper never forgets. And so sometimes you've got to write it down, jot it down, in order to make sure that here's what we're committing to. Because we want to make sure that we live out this commitment, because this is what's going to change our future. This is what's going to make the difference for why we want to come home at night. This is what's going to make the difference for why we want to go back to work the next day. This is what's going to make the difference for why when we see that person's name on our phone ID that we're going to pick up and answer the phone. This is what's going to make the difference and why we want to stay in relationship with the person. Because if you get enough working against you in that relationship, listen, it is harder to try to now work uphill than if we just kept the hill as small as possible. It's a lot easier to just keep walking over these little hills that come up from time to time in our relationships. And there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. There's no such thing as some God-given relationship that doesn't come with its own trouble, doesn't come with its own challenges. There is no such thing. Sometimes we think, well, if this was God-given, then I shouldn't have all of these challenges. Not necessarily so. Not necessarily so. And so we've got to agree to a plan of action. Now, here's what happens sometimes. What happens sometimes is that when we have a plan of action, sometimes in the executing of that plan, sometimes things don't work as well as they look like on paper, as well as they look like when we were verbally discussing it. And that's okay. That's not a problem. But here's what I've noticed is that when sometimes these solutions don't work, what happens? People go back to the problem instead of going back to finding another solution. Let me say that again. This is not the time to go back to the problem. This is the time to go back to looking at another solution. Why? Because we already understand the problem. We don't need to bring the problem back up. We are trying to find a solution to a problem that we already understand. We're now trying to find a solution that will fix the problem. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater simply because you're saying, man, this just doesn't seem to be working. All right, let's solve the problem. Let's not try and go back to rediscussing the problem. And I've seen people do that in all the energy that was now being given to the solution is now all of a sudden being put back into the problem. And we're rediscussing the problem like we don't understand it already. Like we didn't already settle that already. That's already understood. We don't need to go back to that part. We now just need to stick with, okay, this solution didn't work. Why didn't this solution work? Was it something that we need to tweak about the solution itself? Or do we just need to throw that solution totally out and bring another one to the table? But the reality is that we've got to continue to work on finding the solution, not to regress back to the problem. And this is why I'm sharing and telling you that it is solvable if you and I do the work to work on the resolution. But if you and I do not put in the work on this side, then the problem will seem as if it is so gigantic that there is no solution for the problem. And that's simply because we keep spending our time and our energy and spinning our wheels in the problem area instead of spending our energy and time in the resolution area. Now, this doesn't mean that, listen, you're going to have a solution overnight. Listen, there are times in which you may have to keep working at this and keep plugging away and keep working at this. But if the relationship is that meaningful, if the relationship is that valuable, if it has that kind of significance to you, then the work is well worth it because you've already decided that the relationship is that important. And so, listen, we have talked about how to resolve conflict. Listen, we've talked about how to resolve conflict in relationships. Listen, we have covered several components over these last 7 segments. This is the 8th one today. And so, listen, we're going to be diving into something totally different. Once again, how do we make our relationships better? How do we really maximize them? How do we really kind of work through some of the challenges? So we're going to be getting into something new on next week. But listen, before you go, listen, here's what I want to ask that you do. I want to ask, listen, that you would take the time out to partner, to partner with RUFF'N IT. That's what I'm asking you to do. Listen, that you would take the time out to partner with RUFF'N IT. Now, you may say, well, what does that partnership look like? Here's where I'm asking that, listen, that you would look at these different options in which you can financially partner with RUFF'N IT. That's right. Listen, here are some different options that, listen, I am sharing with you today. So whether it is the Cash App, whether it is the PayPal, or listen, maybe you're one of those ones that like to write a check or to send a money order. But I'm saying to you, no matter what particular method you choose, I'm asking that you would look at one of these and begin to say, listen, I want to partner, because what has happened today has helped me in my relationships. What has happened today has really helped move the needle. And that becomes really valuable when you talk about the value that you place on the relationships that this really speaks to, whether it is a family relationship, whether it is a romantic relationship, whether it's a marriage, it's a dating relationship. Listen, whether it is a professional relationship, maybe it's a spiritual relationship, it's a church relationship, this is your brother or sister in Christ. What I'm saying to you is that if you have found that this investment has made a difference for you, I'm asking that you would therefore turn around and help make a difference here because of the investment that has taken place. Let the law of reciprocity go to work so that you and I might both benefit from one another. And so listen, so I thank you so much for being here today. I thank you so much for being a part of RUFF'N IT. Listen, we'll be here again next Thursday as we would get into another relationship topic. But listen, I want to thank you so much for being here. But not only do I want to thank you for being here, but listen, I encourage you that, listen, that you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Listen, that you would hit that bell icon so that you can get those notifications. that you, if you're watching us on Facebook, listen, that you would not only like our page, but that you would follow us. And most importantly, if this has really been something that really spoke to you today, share it with somebody. Let this bless somebody else the way that it has blessed you. But I thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again on next Thursday. This is Pastor and Therapist Marcus Ruffin, and you be blessed.